Yeah, this is probably gonna be long form. Since I started on this, what was it? September 6th is when I kicked this off, and I got a lot of support from family and friends, people that I've served with in the past. I've also been met with some realities, of the topic of suicide, right? And I don't take a religious point of view or a religious stance when it comes to this, and I've been asked, who am I to say if someone has the right to take their own life? This isn't about if someone has the right to take their own life. If someone's sick, dying, and at the end, and the only thing keeping them alive is heavy medications and machines, man. Is that suicide? This is more coming from the angle of, otherwise healthy individuals, right, that experience some sort of trauma that is, affecting their life in an extremely negative way, and creating a mental health crisis for them, right? I want to point out, the guy, and you can Google it, and I forget his name, jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge. And he said the second that he jumped off the bridge, he was like, why am I doing this? It's like, the problem that I have is really insignificant, and I could have found a solution. That's what he's thinking as he's plunging towards the water to his death. And he survived it, and he lived to tell that story. We sometimes, we get wrapped up in our bullshit, and that's part of the reason why, I wasn't suicidal when I left, and I've admitted I've had my bouts with suicidal ideation, right? And, that's one of the reasons why I got up and left, because, I was blocking myself in, right? I painted myself in a corner, and I wasn't seeing any result. Did I have to get on my motorcycle and ride away? No. At the time, did it seem like it was the solution to the problem? Absolutely yes. And thank the Great Spirit, that I got an idea. Well, instead of just getting on the motorcycle and riding away and doing something stupid, why don't you do this with, some sort of purpose, right? So here I am. I met somebody, in Los Angeles, of all places, who told me he was a veteran. And I told him about what I was doing. And he started with this whole stance, well, we know why veterans are killing themselves, because of the shit that they made you guys do. He said he's prior service, he didn't fight in GY. And exactly what, I've gotten, comments about, 9/11 conspiracies and, current events going on in the world and whatnot, and these stigmas, right? These post-traumatic stress stigmas, right? That everybody's a ticking time bomb. If you have post-traumatic stress, you're going to blow up. You're going to fucking, do something fucking insane. And that's not true. Most people suffer in silence, and that's kind of the whole point of all this, right? So that people don't have to suffer in silence. So they know that there's somewhere that they can go, somewhere where they can turn. You guys know me. I don't do cue cards, and, I try to say what I'm thinking, sometimes I have difficulty remembering, and, I'm gonna go ahead and say it. Yeah, 988's there, the VA's there. We have issues with the VA, man. Fucking waiting lines. And okay, yeah, you can see the shrink, but it'll be in 2 months. Sometimes 2 months isn't enough. And I've heard some complaints about 988, and I've heard others that aren't so bad. I've utilized 988 in the past, and there's been someone there to talk to. At the very least, there's someone there to talk to. And you may walk away with a little bit different perspective, man. And that little change in your perspective, right? It might get you through the next day, the next week, right? And call it back again. Call somebody else if you have to. Don't hang up. Stay on the line. You know, you got to do whatever it takes. You know, and we, you know, you, me, we have to do whatever it takes to make sure that somebody that's suffering a mental health crisis or in the middle of just fuck, what do I fucking do? I'm so sick of this bullshit. You know, they have somewhere to turn. You know, we all got problems, right? We all got shit going on. We all got bills. We all got relationship issues. We all got shit going on, right? But when that shit comes to a head, and you got to be prepared. And it's like one of my buddy, you know, who told me, you know, not my buddy, he was a counselor, told me, you know, I want you guys, he told us as a group, I want you guys to be like those Spartans, you know, in that movie 300, you know, when he calls them to attention, when he calls them to guard, you know, when you get triggered and your PTSD fucking starts fucking doing its fucking shit, you know, to have the tools to fucking, you know, to like stand forward and be on guard against it. So it doesn't affect your life and throw you into a fucking turmoil, right? A turmoil of, you know, what are the things we do? You know, sex, booze, drugs, you know, and bad choices, you know, bad financial choices, bad life choices, you know, pushing family and friends away. You know, that's one of the big things I know that I've experienced and I've seen others do. Having a moment, you know, and I get it, and you need a little time and you can work it out. But, you know, when it's to the point you're pushing your family and your friends away because of you're going through shit and it's so bad that you feel like fucking shit. And then you find yourself alone because you push people away. You know, these are just examples, you know, and I don't have all the answers, man. If I did, you know, I wouldn't be out here doing this. So I don't know how this is going to post to Instagram or any of that. I'm going to put it on long form on YouTube. But, you know, remember, man, you know, all y'all out there, anybody that's listening to this, man, there's help, there's hope, you know, and you can continue on, you know, and I'm not talking out my ass. I've been through my own shit. And, you know, someone always comes along, man, and, you know, I know there's people out there that have been through worse than me. I get that, and I respect that. And if there's anything I can do to help anyone, absolutely, man. You know, I'll do it. You know, especially if you're one of my brothers and my family members. You know, absolutely, man. You know, because. You know, what's 5 minutes of my time or 5 days of my time in comparison to your life and you getting somewhere where you're stable, right? And can find yourself again. With that, I'll close. And as usual, let's ride.